Окей, да, чакай да се уключим. Уключи. Mr. Vasiljevic, and I would like to thank you and for coming to this webinar, to participating, and I'd like to welcome you to this second webinar that we organized as a part of the Center of Excellence in Finance 2017 Webinar Series and Budget Preparation and Execution Learning Program. Besides thanking all of our, I would say about 20 participants for attending this webinar, I would like to thank at the beginning to the International Monetary Fund and to Ministries of Finance of the Netherlands and Albania for providing us their generous support in organization of this webinar. As probably most of you already know, Excellence in Finance, or CEF, is the leading learning organization that supports capacity development of financial officials from South Europe in fields of public finance management, tax policy and administration, and central banking. But besides providing technical and in-depth assistance within these three thematic areas, we place great value into building capacities of financial officials to lead, manage, communicate, and coordinate financial reforms in their country. Taking into account the dynamics of learning that online environment is nowadays offering, we have decided to complement our face-to-face learning events with a series of webinars. All webinars that we organize this year are free for everyone to participate, and they are free of charge. In that sense, I would strongly encourage you to enroll or to register in our online learning campus, where we'll have the opportunity to be updated on all the online events that we offer throughout the year. The list of topics that we will cover throughout webinars this year is already published in our 2017 learning program, but all the details regarding each of the webinar and all other events that we organize here at the CEF published on our website on events page. So please go there and you will see all the details that you need. With today's webinar, we will bring the discussion that would help us understand the difference between baseline and new policy estimates. This webinar will explore how making the distinction between baseline estimates, in other words, current policies, and related to policy initiatives, establishing budget ceilings. This webinar will also be an opportunity to discuss how line ministries' submissions of budget proposals in form of current and new initiatives could direct limited budget funds towards achievement of policy priorities and towards constraining spending to medium-term fiscal objectives. For the agenda of this webinar, it will be consisted of 4 presentations. We will have today with us 4 lectures coming from 4 different institutions. And in between these presentations or lectures, we will have 2 sessions for questions and answers of participants. First, we will start with the presentation on the difference between baseline expenditures and new policy initiatives, while assessing their benefits for formulating credible budgets and strengthening midterm perspective. This presentation will be delivered by Susan Flynn, IMF advisor for public financial management in Southeast Europe. Susan has been based in the CEF since October 2016, and ever since it has been of great value to delivery of CEF's learning events related to budget preparation and execution. The second presentation during this webinar will focus on the key features of the Dutch expenditure framework, and it will examine what role baseline expenditures play in it. Furthermore, it will in detail explain why fiscal rules present a crucial precondition for undertaking the reform. This part, or this presentation, will be delivered by Tim, coming from the Ministry of Finance of Netherlands. But besides being senior economist at the Fiscal Policy Department of the Ministry of Finance, there is also IMF expert on Dutch and EU fiscal growth policies. After these two presentations, I will encourage all of our participants to ask questions so that first of two our presenters could give them further elaborations of what they have previously presented. A short question and answer session. We continue with the third presentation. This presentation will be delivered by Ms. Sasha Jazbec, who's been heading budget department of the Ministry of Finance of Slovenia for the past 3 years. This part of the agenda will focus on the tools estimating costs of baseline and new policies that ministries and Ministry of Finance utilize here in Slovenia. Throughout several examples, Ms. Jazbec will also show us how these estimates are used in preparation of Slovenian fiscal framework. Finally, the last presentation during this webinar will be delivered by the head of or director of the Budget Analysis and Program Department of the Ministry of Finance of Albania, Mr. Genjan Opre. His concluding session will describe Albania's recent experience on implementing this reform. This presentation will discuss how ministries of finance can instigate line ministries to find first savings within their budget envelopes. After presentations, we will also allow some time for further discussion and further answering the questions received from participants. So in that sense, I strongly encourage you to leave your questions in our chat box so that all the answers are provided to you during this webinar. In total, we predict this webinar will run any kind of technical issues. I will give you now several very basic technical information that during this webinar. So the first thing is that our administrators will mute all the participants, all lecturers, and all attendees during the presentations, except the leading presenter, in order to secure the best quality of the sound. Further on, the webinar will be recorded, and the recording of it will be sent to you within next several days in a follow-up email that also contain additional reading materials that we've identified as useful for further understanding of the topic that we have discussed during this webinar. In order to questions, comments, ideas, observations during this webinar, you should do by leaving your comments in a chat box. Here it is marked with a red circle. But when doing so, please take in mind that you should select sending to everyone so that all of us can receive and see a question you have asked. Finally, in the follow-up email that my colleague Ida and I will send you later on today, we will ask you to kindly fill in one evaluation form regarding this webinar that will help us create even better webinars in the future. So without having any intention to further on take the time from our presenters, now I would like to give word to our first speaker of the day, Susan Flynn. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the slides. Here we go. Yes. Okay, thank you. So first of all, thank you very much, Tara and Ida, for organizing this webinar. I'd like first to introduce myself very quickly. I'm the IMF Regional PFM Advisor, and I should mention that it's funded by the European Union and credit them for their general support. So overall, I cover 6 countries, Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. So really focusing on Southeast Europe. So, and during this presentation, I'd like to step back a little bit from precisely the baseline versus new policy estimates discussion and put it within the overall context of medium-term budgeting and the fiscal framework. So, I think we should answer the question why we should make decisions beyond the annual budget. And some of these speak directly to the issue that we're discussing today. To, first of all, capture deferred effects of today's decision making. Focus just on annual budget. We can be short term, especially politicians, in our thinking, and not consider sustainable decisions. So this one really does relate to between current policy and additional policies, new policies. So the aim of making non-discretionary into discretionary. So the principle being that all policies can be changed with sufficient time. So if we're budgeting on a medium-term basis, enables us to shift the thinking from those studies when they become less discretionary. Having a medium-term framework also helps us signal future changes and manage expectations of all holders, allowing them time to adapt. And add an element of control, number 4 there, by nature of those who enter the commitments, understand their future spending limits and help them think forward. So what we say, address time inconsistency of spending preferences. What we're talking about is the urge I think most of us have is to spend today thinking about the consequences tomorrow. So, definition of medium-term budgeting. It's the set of institutional arrangements used for formulating, presenting and restricting multi-year revenue and expenditure variables. And the example here comes from Australia. So as each of the medium-term frames, as they call them, for the various ministries, and sums them and then shows the aggregate spending ceiling, the gap between the two being the fiscal space. I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. This nice slide shows how everything fits in. And one of the objectives of the presentation is really to show how
how are important in reasonable annual budget and also taking into consideration the medium term. So one's there, objective, instrument, and the broad contents. So broadly, to have some kind of fiscal rule which is embedded in a fiscal responsibility law, organic budget law. Some countries have PFM laws particularly, in which the permanent fiscal objective. Now those they articulate the government's in terms of how it plan manage fiscally. So it could be around sustainability, responsibility. It could be linked with a numerical fiscal rule related to source balance. Importantly, shows the disclosure requirements throughout the PFM cycle, what the executive is required to report on through the year and also multi-annually. Based on those permanent fiscal objectives, we would have multi-year fiscal targets defined within the medium-term fiscal framework. And of course, that need to have multi-year macroeconomic forecast, year fiscal forecasts, some analysis of fiscal risks, and medium-term fiscal targets linked to the government's fiscal objectives, which are stated in a law. Out of the fiscal framework, of course, will come the aggregate spending envelope, and within that, term budget framework can be constructed. So the fiscal framework will enable development of the multi-year aggregate spending ceiling from the disaggregate to develop spends by spending unit or by ministry. This use some kind of planning margin, and with the MTBF, countries gradually include some kind of performance indicators or targets. Should provide framework for the annual budget over the course of the medium-term budget framework. It doesn't always do that, where a medium-term budget framework is less mature. The focus tends to remain on the annual budget with indicative outer-year forecasts of spending within the MTBF. But gradually we see countries becoming more and more from indicative targets and increasing the bindingness or the fixity of the outer years of the MTBF. So in the annual budget, of course, the appropriations, budgetary controls, so the definition of how flexible the options are, what degree of discretion budget managers have in their performance targets. And usually there are environment rules or reallocation rules in the legal framework. And then finally, of course, the final accounts, which should give us a good opportunity to explain deviations from the budget and discrepancies. And these vintages of the medium-term budget framework should also be explained to enhance the control within the overall framework, so that each of these elements links quite clearly to each other, and that kind of enhances accountability. Okay. So the area about here, and I'll be focusing on going forward, are really the MTBF and a little bit the annual budget. I think quickly go through this slide, but I think it's probably useful to look at who benefits from medium-term budget frameworks, because I think often they're seen by ministries as a Ministry of Finance construct to make it more difficult to say do not. So I think we need to think a little bit broader about what are the benefits of budgeting medium-term and planning on a medium-term basis. So these are the three we normally focus on: strengthening sustainability reinforcing aggregate fiscal discipline. That's something we all want. And that they do that by constraining the budget appropriation in future years to levels consistent with the government's fiscal objectives. Now, remember, the last slide, those will be specified in the legal framework of the responsibility law. Of course, that benefits the finance minister, taxpayers, and future generations on the medium-term fiscal sustainability. Second, promotion of a more strategic allocation of expenditure by a more strategic focus into the budget and removing the focus from immediate administrative blockages and legal constraints, so and a more of a greenfield type thinking, and that generally benefits the parliaments, prime ministers, and ministers. So it's thinking of the benefits of the BF. And it facilitates more efficient intertemporal planning. It enables more certainty, or it should enable more certainty to ministries or spending units, budget holders, about what they're likely to receive in future budgets. So in that sense, it builds the trust between, it should build the trust, and maybe Gentian will expand this in his presentation, but between the ministries and the spending units and the Ministry of Finance. If we see linkages between medium-term expenditure frameworks and they understand the differences, and they have some more certainty about what they're going to expect. Okay. Another thing at the benefits is enhancing control. So the ceilings should, in theory, enhance fiscal discipline through improved controls, through controlling commitments. So the existing commitments within the budget, particularly related to the obvious one is capital budget. It enhances the predictability, as I mentioned earlier. But the important one for this discussion is the prioritization. This between ongoing and new policies is really an issue of prioritizing spending. Distinguishing between ongoing and new policies also helps with the spending review process, something that Slovenia has been working with in recent years. And others in the region are also very interested. Preconditions, we need for EF, we need a credible annual budget, prudent medium-term macroeconomic projections. Very often we see these can be biased or interfered with, and many countries have introduced fiscal councils to remove the political bias in macroeconomic projections. The stable medium-term aggregate fiscal objectives, important, and a comprehensive and unified budget process. And we mean comprehensive, by comprehensive we mean the coverage, so as inclusive as possible, and unified in both one process, including both capital and spending. We can move now on to the nitty-gritty subject matter. What is baseline? It's also sometimes called a no policy change assessment. So what we're doing when we're looking at baselines or no policy change is extrapolating the current year's level of activity into medium or the longer term. By doing that, we're existing activities will continue. The objective of this assessment is to establish what the spending would be under the hypothetical assumption that the policies of the current year are carried out in the next year with no real change of policy. Reasonable starting point in the discussion to consider a scenario in which the level of activity is constant, and then the discussions with each of the budget agencies looks at increases or reductions compare level. And then summing up all the policy change or baseline assessments and comparing the sum to the aggregate ceiling, space can be calculated. And about fiscal space here, we mean the room for new policy initiatives. Of course, fiscal space can also be negative, so that can also indicate to us the need for spending cuts. So having the disaggregated analysis between baseline and new policies enables us to make those prioritization decisions and taking place at the strategic phase of the budget cycle. And pack what we mean a little bit about to assess what is expenditure. If you look at, for example, administrative spending, which here I'm kind of defining as all spending apart from volume-related spending. What we do is take each major component and include it separately for the effects of inflation, with the uplift factors based on macroeconomic assumptions for the type of spending. For example, goods and services. In this example here, we're suggesting makes by 9.8%. You see at different levels for different items. What we do here is take the base year expenditure, we add an inflation uplift, or it's an agreed policy decision, and insert those in. I'll subtract the impact of previously approved policies. So if you look at this example, clearly there's been a policy decision to either cut of wages or reduce the number of staff. But what to recognize here is the baseline assessment should not take into account measures that have not been approved. So if they're still only being considered, they shouldn't be included in the baseline. That are the elements that we're prioritizing in the decision making for new policy initiatives. And therefore, is different from a forecast. When we make a forecast, we're thinking about what's the most likely level of spending or revenues. So we use our experience, we know what's in the pipeline, and we try and make a realistic forecast. Baseline assessment is not doing that. It's conceptually different, and it's looking at the costs of the similar policy in future years. What I've been talking about here are related to non-volume spending, where is involved. So that could be items like education is the obvious example. Even existing policies, the costs will change according to the number of students. Entitlement programs is another very example that will depend on economic forecasts, etc., what you expect the economy is likely to do. So for volume-related spending, you would pursue a similar process as the previous one, but you also factor in assumptions, and the finance would want to be discussing these with the spending units about changes and bring to bear their efficient statistics and available data. And when introducing baseline, I think I want to focus on the most significant or material volume changes when starting this. In the second bullet, should also be thinking about necessary adjustments for the effects of previously announced policy changes may not be fully reflected in the base year figures. So if there's a policy that's been announced that has not yet been fully implemented, it's announced and agreed, then we need to think about the future years, the medium-term impact of those, and include them in the baseline figures. So we should also be thinking about and bringing to bear here some international experience, ceilings and so on, excluding cyclically sensitive expenditures. Generally, debt interest and, in some countries, unemployment benefits are excluded from the ceilings. Sometimes you see if it's externally financed projects, for example, which are dependent on donor disbursements or achieving a certain benchmarks, they can be excluded. Countries set spending limits in real or volume terms. Sweden includes contingency margins, and they reprofile within the multi-year expenditure limits if any kind of economic shock, or I guess at the most extreme you would need to revise the entire medium-term budget framework if a significant change in the overall fiscal strategy. So that's the extent of my slides, and I hope I've not gone too quickly through those.
I think it was quite thorough.
Was it good?
But we can continue later on through our discussion to explain further if needed. And I would really encourage participants to leave the questions in our chat box so that we can, after the presentations, provide answers to them. Then I suggest that we continue with the next presentation. Chair.
Hi, hello. I'll hang up my share screen button. And then one. Okay.
Yes, I see you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. This is the time I'm doing a webinar with this software, so I still have to get used to it. Thank you for the opportunity to give presentation here, also connected with the IMF presentation and from Albania afterwards. My presentation is about the Dutch practice more often with fiscal rules and baselines for expenditures. I will discuss a lot. I will try to keep my story short, and I thought I'd first start with a short information beforehand. In the Netherlands, working with a budget baseline is a continuous process, actually. We constantly try to assess the assumptions behind budgetary events and forecasting and how realistic also the baseline is. But because working with a baseline is connected in the Dutch fiscal framework with fiscal rules and also with the political cycle, there are a lot of different steps we take throughout the cycle of a cabinet when working with a with baseline and also with fiscal rules. I thought to start just with the beginning of our budget cycle, just after the elections we just had actually in the Netherlands, and show you all the steps we do and how we use the baseline as a very useful instrument for also assessing new policy also and working towards fiscal sustainability. So it was a process, continuously iterating actually, but I'll start at the beginning and we'll go through. It's about the Dutch expenditure framework. I'll try to provide you with a visualization afterwards to sort of summarize what I'm about to tell you now. It's a lot, In the Netherlands, I don't know if everybody knows how the situation is here. It's a small country. But in the Netherlands, the cabinet, every 4 years, we have an election from parliament. And at the start of the parliament term, so just after the election, parties in parliament have to make a government. And they have to sort of make a contract, which is called the coalition agreement, and also create a cabinet of ministers. And in agreement, all new policies, sort of national development plan, is announced for the future 4 years of a term, which is the same as the parliament term. There, the parliament has to vote also on this coalition agreement, if they agree with it or not. So it's a majority support. And part of the agreement is also the expenditure framework. A coalition agreement, there's all the policies it will undertake for the coming time, nation, defense, all aspects. It's very detailed actually. And well, because it is policy they want to pursue, that costs money, and that is announced in this coalition agreement. Part of it actually. It contains all the policies the government intends to undertake for the coming time, and shows how money it will spend on it. That is also part of the political commitment, because it's a political contract. And in this coalition agreement, there's this expenditure path is 8, so which is the sum of all government expenditures, should all be aimed at a specific fiscal target. And I will not use a sort of budgetary balance rule as an example, because this is a bit of a stylized presentation. But expenditure is called the aggregate expenditure ceiling. That is total expenditure the government undertakes for the coming 4 years. And it's set as a fiscal rule. And this is very important in my country. It changed actually without grave political consequences for the government coalition. Because or a minister of finance or the government or the cabinet tries to be non-compliant with this fiscal rule, it actually loses the majority support in parliament, like I described in the first bullet. The rule is very visible, actually. It reaches out in the newspapers even, and it's known that if ministers or a cabinet doesn't comply with fiscal rules, which are part of the coalition agreement, then a minister in the cabinet will step the cabinet and lose its job. Just to show you how much focus there is on this expenditure ceiling. Part of the Dutch fiscal framework is that the revenue and expenditure developments actually are strictly separated. At cabinet period, we try to forecast how much revenues we get. We try to make an expenditure path which is just below this revenue forecast to make sure we can finance everything. But then, if revenues drop because of the business cycle, for example, we change anything on the expenditure path. The path is set for the coming 4 years. Cyclical and the volatile nature of revenues, because Netherlands is a smaller economy and we are a very open economy. Saying if Germany sneezes, the whole Netherlands will get a cold, which is actually because we earn a lot of money and also tax revenues for exporting to other European countries. And in it's not just volatility, but it's also the pro-cyclical bias in politics. We have a better forecast for GDP, meaning we'll have more tax revenues, meaning more fiscal space, in the eyes of the politicians, and they really want to spend that money, be pro-cyclical, and promote automatic economic stabilization. We're not managers when the business cycle is going better and we're earning more taxes, for example. This is an element in the story, because it focuses the story or the fiscal framework also on expenditure discipline. Because any expenditure, because of new developments, there's a lot of pressure on sticking to this expenditure ceiling. The ceiling is set. It is also split out among different ministerial sub-ceilings. Every ministry in the Netherlands has its own sub-ceiling. The Ministry of Education has its own sub-ceiling. the Ministry of Defense, Infrastructure, and so on. Ceiling, so all sub-ceilings is unchangeable, part of law. The decision among ministries can be more flexible. The situation is, if a minister decides to ask for extra money, it has because we won't change the aggregate ceiling, which is the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance. So go to the ministries to collect money on budget within its own budget ceiling, its sub-ceiling. And ministers and that are always the best friends, of course, and they're from the same political party. There is a bit of competition because nobody wants to lose their money. So a lot of peer pressure in the Netherlands in the cabinet to stick to your sub-ceiling, actually the budgetary discipline. In general, there is one main budgetary decision-making moment per year. This is in quarter one. And quarter two. We're actually now running the budgetary decisions for the coming year. And there are two small moments for macroeconomic tweaks of the budget, some higher or in these times lower inflation, other operational issues, of course. And that is all budgetary decisions to be made in these moments are just the tweaks within these ceilings. Actually, that from the beginning of the cabinet term, there is coalition agreement with a fixed expenditure ceiling on the aggregate level, and so on, and the whole framework is set to focus on budgetary discipline within these ceilings. Just give you a short visualization of the story. This shows you, of course, the 4 years of the cabinet term. So years now, T+1, T+2, and T+3. In this cabinet period, there's first an economic forecast, which is done by the Independent Fiscal Council in the Netherlands called the CPB. And I give an example of a fiscal target of being having a budget balanced budget actually. It's a bit more technical in real life, but just for the sake of the story. They do this own revenue forecasting. So unchanged policy, I'll get back to it later on, there will be the amount of revenues for the coming 4 years. If we spend more than these revenue forecasts, we're losing fiscal space, but we're also just spending more money and debt will increase. So on average, we want to fix the expenditure ceilings under or below the revenue forecasting. And what we want trend-based forecast. We don't look at specific years how much revenue we earn there. So it's more on a trend-based forecast, and expenditure should be below, on average, below this revenues forecasting. And afterwards, the third step is actually the sub-ceilings. The money which how to spend to stick with this fiscal target is this over all the line ministries using these sub-ceilings I just explained. The fiscal framework and the expenditure framework is being built. This is a term, but we know, of course, I'm just going to push a lot of buttons. We know that in reality, GDP growth or revenue growth will change because the economy will just perform a bit better than expected, and in other years it will perform worse than expected. Anything of expenditure ceiling in this situation. So mean windfall within the budgetary framework, we collect more revenues, for example, with expenditure ceilings for this. The same is done for a setback. This is called again the automatic economic stabilization by separating revenue developments through a period with expenditure development. And actually, at cabinet, these various sub-ceilings and this step and existing and new policies are laid down in a ministerial budget law. So for again, the Ministry of Education, own budget law, which has a sub-ceiling, which together with all the other ministerial budget laws adds some to the aggregate expenditure ceilings. And these are put for a vote every year, of course, like in any other country. They require parliamentary support. But now we're getting to the baselines. The trick is with these budget baselines, they're pretty detailed. The standard corpus or standard way we write the budget laws, but they're detailed actually from chapter to sub-paragraphs. Expenditure education, that's a budget law, of course. Then there's a chapter on secondary education. And there's a paragraph on subsidies, and there's a sub-paragraph on subsidy to increase teachers' quality. Just an example again. Each level in this budget law is considered budgetary baseline. And follow the fiscal rules. From the fiscal rules, any budgetary deviation from this baseline or compared to this baseline will be compensated within the ministerial sub-ceiling. This is a discipline and it helps budgetary forecasting. That's more, just like Suzanne said in a very good presentation before. All stick with the government, we try to stick with the forecasted expenditures. We're not only focusing on budget discipline and sustainability, but build in trust and certainty. That's one other aspect is that there's more competition, which I will explain later, that increases the quality of public finance. But to get to trust and certainty, we've research is done by CPB, but also other academic institutions, that for example, in the education sector, when there is uncertainty about the budget for the coming few years, tend to not hire teachers with a permanent contract. And as you can have a permanent contract, which has no date, or you can have a yearly contract. And with that, in volatile times, when there's more uncertainty in budget, more teachers are put in temporary contracts, which there's a link also with undermining the quality, because you're less committed to your organization if you know you will lose your job in a year. So that's an example to show you how trust and certainty works into the quality of public finance, because we're offering certainty for the coming 3 years to do an investment in education, for example. Hence, budgetary discipline does help the quality of finance, we think. We're actually convinced in our national specific situation. And this is there is more competition within the country. You need to spend, at least in my country we see it, there's not pressure on the quality of how you spend it, on the allocation of money and assessing the efficiency and effectiveness of policies. By creating this constraint, setting these constraints on the expenditure, we introduce a bit more competition. Libraries with good ideas have to put a good story with the excellent cost-benefit analysis to show that new policy proposed is actually worth the money. And what happens when putting a ministerial sub-ceiling in place is that there is more competition within a line ministry. Because the total amount of money they get from the Ministry of Finance and actually from the Parliament. So the size of the pie is set, so the competition about who gets the biggest chunk. And you only get more money if you have a better cost-benefit analysis supporting the quality of your policies. So, and we see what I try to achieve with this story is actually because, and this is the last bullet, because expenditure ceilings are set as fiscal rules in the coalition agreement, and each ministry has its own sub-ceiling. There's no sub-ceiling between two ministries. Political responsibilities are aligned, because there's a sub-ceiling per ministry in the cabinet, vertically, because the expenditure ceiling equals the parliamentary term, actually, the order of the parliament, with both 4 years, forward-looking. So, second last slide, I'll speed up a bit. Now, when the sub-ceilings are set, the world can change or we can find new policies. And the way we deal with it is the following. Line ministries are allowed to propose a change to a sub-ceiling or to relocate resources between different levels in the budget. In the last slide, I said there are different paragraphs, sub-paragraphs, which are all considered to be sub-ceilings. Any change up to that detailed level, which is in the budget law, needs approval by the Ministry of Finance, before being sent to Parliament for vote. So finance can block anything when it's tied with fiscal rules. Of course, he needs political support there, but he has the right to do so in our budget laws on fiscal sustainability. Those are quite intuitive, actually. We try not to work with too much quantitative rules on what budget to use and why not. Because, well, we have limited time, and more time we can focus on discussing the quality of the budget, the policy is. So new policy get approval. You can look at the chart or the diagram with the 3 green blocks and 1 red block. New policies can never be financed using fall in budget. If they're temporary or they're unforeseen. An unforeseen increase of budget is not for a budget to spend. You can create or propose new policies that will get support of the Ministry of Finance when you do a budget cut only elsewhere within your own subsidy ceiling. For example, something is a bit more expected than a bit more expensive than expected. It can be within the budget ceiling, so within the sort of baseline. And if you have too much windfall budget you need, then you can do a budget cut. There's a lot of fiscal rules in my country, but this is where it gets more, how to say, this is the short story. And who does what in the Netherlands situation? So in the Ministry of Finance, first of all, the Minister of Finance is responsible for the aggregate budget ceiling. In the Ministry of Finance, there's the Directorate General Budget, who coordinates budget policy. He's the director. There are 2 budget affairs departments responsible for the budgetary framework. They design fiscal policy. That is the place where I work. And officers at the Inspectorate of the Budget monitor compliance with fiscal rules. For example, the diagram you see above. And they're mandated to act in case of non-compliance, meaning we'll do the budgetary negotiations to make sure that the ministry stays within its own ceiling. Policies by the Inspectorate of the Budget. We actually have a standard set of data requirements, which we have specific goals, assessing new policy. See an effectiveness of policy, will it work and is it effective? Are budget assumptions realistic? And will it be compliant with fiscal rules? We're able to finance the new policies by using money from its own budget. This is really important. Everything is done to stick within the expenditure ceiling and not to change anything of the budget baseline. And these are the baseline exercises we have throughout the year, just to show you how baseline, which is sort of the expenditure ceiling, for example, just using a stylized model, works. And in the 4th quarter, all the Ministry of Finance are required to split each expenditure line in the IFMIS system, which is a very basic, it's not advanced IFMIS system. I know many countries have more complicated ones than us. It's very basic, intuitive. But the line item in this IFMIS system is split in different price components, and they should be shared with the Ministry of Finance. For example, defense expenditure, it's relative to dollar of exchange rate developments, to inflation, only in the Netherlands, but also in other countries, for example, metal prices and so on. Ministry of the State and afterwards shares this information with units and fiscal institutions responsible for economic and budgetary forecasting. If we really unbalanced price components within a line item, we see threats to the baseline, budget baseline, and we need to change that. All evaluated, and these evaluations have to produce budget options of how the same policy could be employed successfully and effectively with 20% less resource or money compared to the baseline. For example, how would you be able to maintain the teacher's quality in primary education by cutting budget with 20%? This is achievable, but this is just the goal we set, and 2 options to show the outside world how to do the same job for less money. and at the end stick within the budgetary ceiling. Actually, this budget options list is produced. The a la carte menu with different budget cuts or structural reforms and even also new policies. The budgetary impact of these options are calculated in euros, and it's for budgetary negotiations to show what kind of budget cuts again are available to have a financial setback with the ministry. Again, defense has a helicopter which crashes somewhere because of a mistake in the country. A lot of budget cuts already waiting that we can employ to make sure we can deal with this setback with any expenditure ceiling. The last bullet, and then my presentation stops. C, which is our fiscal council, also produces medium and longer term budgetary outlooks, which is forecasting, like Suzanne said. What we did also to scenario test our budgetary baseline, to test budgetary assumptions we have. So I know a lot, and I hope not too quick, and I hope it provides you with some information about how things go in the Netherlands. Answer any questions, and of course send me any email afterwards. So now to my colleagues.
Well, thank you so much for this quite rich presentation, and I have to say, even though it was in slides, it provided a lot of information. For me, I have several questions, but since we went a bit out of planned time, I'll keep my questions for the end of the presentations, if you agree, so that now we can give stage for Mrs. Yazbet to give us her part of presentation. Oh, we can see her screen. We just need to switch on her microphone.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Hello, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. It's my first time also at the webinar at all, and also thanks for my predecessor for an extremely interesting presentation on how things work in Holland. I'm always a bit envious about how things work in Holland. Anyhow, I will try and present to you tools are used in Slovenia for estimating baseline and new policy initiatives, and I will also start. One second, sorry, I'm trying to go on. Here we are. Start with the fiscal framework preparation, how we do it in Slovenia. We get the forecast from our Institute for Macroeconomic Analysis and Development. So we get this as an input of an independent institution of the macroeconomic indicators that we are to use when setting our public finance framework. Since we do have public finance objectives, you know, we are in the Slovenia is in the fiscal consolidation. We need to consolidate our public finances because this is what we had written down in our constitution. So we had chosen a path how to consolidate. We have target balances for several years. So this is our background, I would say. And then with the help of macroeconomic indicators and with the existing revenue policies, we calculate the fiscal space. So we calculate the revenue. Then using both the framework, or so to say the balances, the target balances, and the revenues, we are able to see how much fiscal space there is, how much we can spent for the expenditure policy. And the way we do it, we do it like we do the so-called fiscal costs, so to say, first. So these are the public sector wages, the so-called legal obligations, I could say. So these are the public sector wages, this interest, and some transfers to pension funds and to transfers to individuals. So these are all the musts of the budgets, of the general government budgets, and this is how we then establish what is the fiscal space, how much room there is for other, say, for investment and for other policy measures. When we do the fiscal framework preparation, we obviously compare the spontaneous and target scenarios. In this stage, I would say that we focus on the big picture. We means the Ministry of Finance, since we are the ones who prepares this. And we in this process collect from line ministries their inputs or their initiatives. But the thing is that the budget preparation or the fiscal framework preparation is a ongoing process, you know, since laws are adopted all the time and changes are happening all the time. So we do collect this data, you know, in real time. And when February and March, when they come, we have a lot of ammunition ready to prepare these spontaneous scenarios. So, as I said, we do collect things from the line ministries as well, both at two points in time. One is now in the spring before we do the fiscal framework, and the second one is then in the summer before we do the budgets for the following year and for +1 and T+2. So the line ministries or Ministry of Finance, then we estimate the current the new policy initiatives, and we use various assumptions. You know, some things are fairly easy to calculate or to estimate, and I really liked the expression that Suzanne used in her first presentation. She was talking about volume-related spending. So we have some individuals that get some transfers, or we have pensioners, or so it's easy to estimate. And then have some things which are really impossible to estimate. For example, one such example is when, you know, we were on the verge of the migrant flows. It's impossible to assess what impact this scenario or this event will have on budgets. So when we get these estimates from line ministries to test their accuracy, the reasonableness of this information, I must say that this is difficult, as I tried to mention before, because the line ministries are the ones that actually know their policies, their areas better, and we kind of do depend on them when it comes to assessing their accuracy. So one example at this point, one example of how we do the of how we do the calculation of current policy initiatives is here. So, for example, in the pension fund, the pension fund in Slovenia collects the social security contributions, but since there are more pensioners to be paid than social security contribution, the budget has to do annual pension fund transfer in order for the fund to be balanced. So the current or the spontaneous scenario or the current policy is that, for example, pensions are indexed by both wage and inflation. So a combination of the two. And for example, when calculated the for 18 and for 19, we realized that in the spontaneous scenario, we would need a transfer of 1,239 million for the fund to be to be balanced, and in 2019 we would need an additional 50 million more. And if we come to a conclusion that this will not fit into the general government ceiling, then we try some changes, so some target or some different scenarios. And one of the ideas is, for example, just the inflation indexation. And when we do that, we come up with a new estimate, and they are able to compare, how much the new initiative costs regards or in comparison to the old initiative. So if we do that, in this case, if indexation is changed, then we're good. And if indexation is not changed, so for example, if this policy, if this idea, if this measure is not acceptable, then since we need to remain within the boundaries, some other policy measure needs to be changed or needs to be undertaken in order to achieve the desired fiscal targets. Our experience is that as we prepare the framework, we look more from the big picture point of view. We look more at the economic categories as such, and then we do rely much more on the line ministries' assumptions and numbers when we are setting the budget ceilings. This is what predecessor called the ceilings for different ministries. So when we get the fiscal space for state budget, we divide those envelopes to different ministries, and then we look at their numbers. So I must say that the experience, our experience is that line ministries very seldom try and find savings within their budget ceilings in order to finance some new policy initiative. They usually ask for additional funds for these new policies. And the government, usually the government selects these new policy initiatives. They will be financed from the available fiscal space via the government priority list, because obviously the line ministries are there to spend money to follow their policies, and for each line ministry their policy is obviously the most important. And that's why we are now forcing in the past years the government to have this priority list, so they know, with all the line ministries coming to ask for extra funds, we know what is the priority of the government and what fiscal space will be used for. I must say that the government also decides on the policy initiatives that will be financed less, when there is a lack of fiscal space. And you can imagine that Ministry of Finance, we do ask the line ministries to propose measures, but you can also imagine that usually they don't. So we try to force them. We give them some of our ideas, and usually they're not very welcome, but it is a way. It is a tier of asking them to come up with better ideas. I must say that non-financial data or policy performance reviews are, in practice, not really used for decisions related to what will or what will not be financed. And from the expert point of view, I say that that is the right thing to do, and that is from what we heard again from the previous presentation. This is what prudent fiscal policies are all about. So forgot to mention that when we try to rely on line ministries' estimates, that line ministries tend to overestimate or to underestimate. It depends on the situation. When they try to when proposing some really important law that they would like to be implemented, they tend to underestimate underestimates the consequences, and this is when we have to be really, really careful when dealing with such initiatives. So, in a nutshell, since I am going to stick to my to allotted time, what our experience shows is that cooperation between Ministry of Finance and line ministries is definitely important in the medium-term budget framework preparation phase, and a thorough and detailed knowledge of line ministry policies by budget department and analysts in the Ministry of Finance is crucial in order to control, or in order to be able to control the expenditure structure of line ministries. As I'd already mentioned, line ministries in this country are, I guess, they will always be on the side of the Ministry of Finance when it comes to medium-term budget framework preparation, and they behave as if the budget balance is only the Ministry of Finance problem, is not the ownership. We don't see any ownership from the size of line ministries. And what we have been trying to do recently is to have them a bit more on board and to get to them the message that this owners, if we manage to find the less rational uses of public money in their respective areas, then there will be more to spend elsewhere. And I guess it's still missing, and this is what we are working on with line ministries, with their financial services, and I would probably just stop here. Very much.
Yes, but the presentation was, I would say, quite close to almost what majority of countries here in the region are facing. So with hearing the Netherlands experience, which is quite, I would say, advanced for what we have here, hopefully we will use it as an inspiration to achieve what we've identified as a possible basis for further advancement of our fiscal frameworks. But before continuing this further and our final presentation, I have a very short question for you, and this is: does circular and information contained in it prove to be the only way to guide budget beneficiaries here in Slovenia to do accurate calculations, or there were some other attempts to build their capacities further on throughout different methodologies, guidelines on how these estimates, no matter whether they concern current policies or new policies, should be done?
Can you hear? You think the circular was the way to have better, or any other ways, or was that the answer? Was that the question?
Yes.
When we prepare the framework and the budget documents, yes, we do have a circular, and we different budget lines, so to speak, were calculated, and the way we do it. But what we always get is the budget negotiations, and then they come over and they try to persuade us what we didn't take into account and what we didn't, and then where we underestimated or so. But say that the of this fiscal rule and of budget ceilings and of some, I would say, stricter fiscal discipline is an ongoing process. Last year was the first year when our Parliament adopted the fiscal framework for 3 years. So they are, I would say, we are in the relatively early stage of this process. We are all learning. We are cooperating. So yes, we are on a good path. Thank you.
And I propose we continue to our final presentation now. Ms. Entian Opre from Albanian Ministry of Finance will present us now their experience with implementing this reform recently in the Albania. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our case. Also, as for the colleagues that spoke before me, it's the first time part of this webinar. I would start my presentation by giving a little bit of a background on Albania's case in differentiating new and base policies and their implications. First and foremost, I would like to say that, I mean, that most of the communist countries during the 90s, we inherited a budget meant as based budgeting, where, I mean, the inputs would be the foremost in budgeting, so the focus would be there. After that, the Ministry of Finance embarked with the help of different organizations and other renowned institutions, more program and performance-oriented budgeting, so more output-oriented. So the focus would be shifted from the input to the output side of things. First and foremost, we managed to introduce a medium-term budget program on a pilot basis with 4 or 5 line ministries that were providing action in the budgeting phase. The council initiated the integrated planning system by the year of 2006, which, in a nutshell, it aims to align better the planning processes, different planning processes, and the strategic ones with the operational ones, and also with other processes that have to do with our strategic aims in terms of memberships into the NATO and the EU. The year 2008 marked an important shift in this difficult exercise on moving to a more program-based and performance-based budgeting, with the let's say, legalization of MTBP through a revised organic budget law, and with a full-fledged, I mean, midterm budget programming and management for all line ministries and all the budget users. Now, I'd like to shift the attention to the, let's say, the cost create the budgetary years after the market and fiscal, after the economic and financial crisis of 2008 hit. Government at the time, due to this not foreseeing it fully the impact on the Albanian economy, had very over-optimistic forecasts with regards to macroeconomic and fiscal projections. Coupled with that, there was, the tendency to plan in projects right the budget was approved, and then when the time where the this working in not in shortfalls, this investment project were contracted out, and the budget cuts were happening at the same time. Also, let's say politics involved into some social welfare schemes, where the beneficiaries would be expanded to a not so much, let's say, logical way that would be fully aligned with the budget resources, and this was particularly visible during the pre-election year and the election year that followed that. Also, to add to the budget resources and expenditure was the case of not paying out the VAT refunds from the tax authorities, which was exacerbated coming to the end of 2013. All of this causes of consequences, where the big one was the annotated fact that the were accumulated at the end of the 2013 year, but here were estimated at the level of 500 million euros, or 5.2% of GDP by period. The new government that took place after the elections of June 2013 had very or no scope at all to embark into new policies, because they had to face a very difficult financial and budgeting situation. As such, the government, the IMF and World Bank, had reached an agreement with which these arrears that were estimated and certified through independent audits offices would be repaid through scheduled payments with help of the IMF and World Bank loan. The consequence of this program would see that the government should make the decisive steps into reducing the public debt to a very manageable level. The long term, reaching 40% of GDP throughout this period, from the 72% of GDP that was estimated in the end of 2013, by including also the value of these accumulated arrears. And the next big to be this program was the elimination, or at least the minimization of the occurrence of the new arrears. Elaborating further into this second objective, what we did is that we periodic monitoring for any sort of creation of new arrears, and ministries to be to be very responsive and to report each and every occurrence of new arrears, so we could then address it in a way that it could be cleared within optimum time without, say, damaging the fiscal discipline and the budget deficit that are, let's say, the overall target for the given budget year. That we tightened up the budgeting process through multiple revisions or the big revisions that we did to the organic budget law. That was up in the month of June in 2016. I would like to highlight briefly the main change there. We stipulated rules that would enable sustainable reduction of public debt over time, that the budget ceilings for the 3 years of the MTBP would be approved in the annual budget law. The new investment projects that are to be allocated in the year, let's say, budgeting would be accommodated only if the amount being spent the first year of the budgeting would not be less than 50% of the total amount that is foreseen for that project. We also limited the exposure of the public partnerships that are paid by the budget from 5% of the total tax revenues. And the last point there would be seeing the Ministry of Finance on differentiating financial implications of new and existing public policies. Within this point, show you that the steps that we have taken with the help of Sigma, within the OECD that has been helping us since 2013 creation crisis, in order to reach the MTBP and to help us in this very important exercise that aims to distinguish the new existing policies and their budget implications. We essentially would do in order to reach this objective. First and foremost, we would be basing our work on the midterm budget program requests and the reports on budget monitoring that the line ministries and other budgetary institutions provide us on specific, let's say, deadlines and timing. I agree with what predecessor, my Slovenian colleague, that mentioned the closeness of Ministry of Finance, the ties that the Ministry of Finance should build the line ministries, because we recognize the importance that the Ministry of Finance should work closely with the key experts in the line ministries in order to identify its policy objectives and their budget implications. Top approach, the expenditures in itself, I mean, from the input-based side of things, which is bottom-up approach. We have this flexibility because we as I already mentioned in my initial slide, that we have this program in which each line minister and each budget program has to their policies and their budgetary implications. So from this, we can have a good start and see and have a vision of what is existing and what is new, and then go a little bit dig further in terms of the nature of expenditures in order to be not 100% sure, but 99% sure that we are getting the desired results into the vision of new and existing policies and their budgetary implications. What would be beneficial to line ministries? I mean, first and foremost, the line ministries would be interested into embarking in this exercise because it falls into the aim of the medium-term budget program in itself, which is the prioritizing of expenditures. And this exercise of dividing new and existing policies and their budget implications would help a lot the ministries into defining their MTBP projections and their and its policies. So in this case, the line ministries would be benefiting a lot by working and being effective in this. After that, there's a scope for potential savings that can be derived from scrutinizing better the expenditures in their economic nature. The line ministries would be in a better position to see if there is a savings here and there, and with the help of the Ministry of Finance, would be in a better position in order to address those potential savings into other programs that are, let's say, in a very bad need for additional resources. And third, then the final point, which is, let's say, the more important, I mean, from the Ministry of Finance view, and which the Ministry of Finance, let's say, spells it out and reiterates whenever, I mean, it gives the opportunity, is that by embarking into this exercise and by both NTBP requests, would be in a far better position to sell the story, I mean, in quotes, to Ministry of Finance and up more, I mean, to the Council of Ministers when budget is scrutinized and then approved, and furthermore to the decision maker, which is the Parliament, is they better informed and would be more keen into, let's say, having information which would then be leading to better decision making and better allocation of resources. I stop and I thank you, and I'm ready to take questions and glad to be providing answers. Thank you.
Much, Mr. Opre, for giving us this presentation on your country's experience in a recent years. I know that we have already crossed this time slot that we've dedicated to this webinar, but I would like to conclude it maybe to one question. Maybe you, Mr. Opre, could give it an answer since you were the last presenter, but it's quite applicable to all of our participants. What do you think, whether Ministry of Finance would be able to make better allocative decisions if it would utilize non-financial data or policy performance data received from or collected from line ministries in order to comply with these medium-term ceilings set within its financial framework? In that sense, maybe Netherlands can share their experience on which areas or which policy areas they mainly use this data, and in which areas the data is not quite applicable.
Okay. I mean, the exercise is rather tricky. It's not that, I mean, that trivial. It's not. Let's say you have something. You have an MTBP request, and you analyze it, and then you say this is new, and so on and so forth. I fully agree with my Slovenian colleague that the task is rather difficult, but it's not impossible. The thing that we have to work closely with the line ministries into getting the information right and to trust each other. As I already said, the medium-term budget program is a tool for prioritizing, but at the same time is a tool that if it is used properly, it would also money into budget funding. And how we use it is a matter of policy decisions. I mean, is a matter of politics. But to get there, we need to work closely, and we need to let's say, to respect the budget cycle as a whole. So what we budget, we implement, we see what kind of results we yield, and then we go to the next process with the lessons learned, or what successes and what shortcomings were there, in order to incorporate better into the next budget cycle. So it's a never-ending process. I'm very confident that when we the results from the exercise, we'll be in a better position when we do our next midterm budget program, and especially the budget ceilings. And I would like to highlight here the let's say the new thing that I heard from the presentation of my Dutch colleague, that he mentioned that the division of new versus existing policies was, let's say, voted by the parliament. I think this is a huge step that we are not yet at stage there, and I see it as one of the best findings of this webinar, that the issue is huge. I mean, in Netherlands, and it has taken this amount of importance that is part of the annual budget law, and as such, let's say, has provided the ceilings for an existing policy, and also as a ceiling for the new ones. And I think I would take it with myself with other, let's say, very valuable things that I've heard and learned from this web. So I look forward. I think that in 3 or 4 years' time, we could have the same result, and to reach a common agreement within our environment and Albanian environment, and to have it as a compulsory item in the budget, the annual budget law. Thank you.
Much for the answer and for the presentation previously given. Geert, maybe quickly to wrap up this presentation and the webinar with your answer.
Is my still? Switched it off. Well, thanks. For Albanian colleagues, sorry, I have difficulty with your name sometimes. You really get the question, but I think I know the answer. Also, what I wanted to say here is that what data do we use with the MTEFs and so on? But actually, there's no standard set of data we use when evaluating costs, for example. It's it's the combination of all elements that lead to a quality of public finance, I think, and better policies, but also a better understanding of budgetary baseline. So setting a constraint, and then that sets a constraint, and then we use evaluation, spending reviews, we use these competition elements between different directorates who all money, and that construct, in that context, there's enough pressure on the quality of public finance, and we use a bit of game theory also just to increase the debate and competition between cabinet ministers also and within line ministries. So that is a big chunk and of the explanation, I think, of why we use fiscal these fiscal constraints or expenditure ceilings. And there's a breach with an expenditure ceiling. Every information is used to try to explain it and understand it and create a common understanding. So therefore, fiscal unit, debt office, any other relevant part of the government will just work together to find the answer, actually. But I just wanted to say this is, a lot of Dutch people don't really take much pride in this fiscal framework because it's a long tradition already. It's in 1843, I think. It survived many different kinds of wars our country's been hit. I think the last generations of fiscal framework started in 1956. So there's a lot of information and data and a lot of opportunities, really hundreds of opportunities if you multiple times per year for, let's say, 20 or 30 years to test the budgetary assumptions. So there's rich data, but it all makes life a bit boring because we know what we're up to. We know how many students on average we will expect, and it's quite accurate, for example, in education. So we anticipate on that, but it's just a lot of history, actually. We have a lot of information, and there's no standard set of information we use. Try to avoid that because that's a pitfall, actually. So, but thank you for the time.
Everyone, I think that now we should wrap up this today's meeting. I would say quite a successful meeting. I would like to thank all of our presenters for their rich presentations, but also to participants for attending this webinar that hopefully has brought a bit of insight into how things can be done in their different countries. As I said at the beginning, we will send you right away quite quick email with follow-up questionnaire, and I will kindly ask you to fill it out. As well, all the webinars that we will organize in upcoming period are going to be advertised on our website. In that sense, once again, thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.